Hey everyone, welcome to Now for Wrath Gaming. If you're here for the first time, we are a channel that is focused on playing the Middle-earth strategy battle game. Sometimes people call it Lord of the Rings Warhammer. No, I've never heard anyone call it that, but
it's probably happened.
It could be. Yeah. It could be. Yeah. Which is Games Workshop's, not quite their red-headed stepchild, but it's like their middle child that they don't care
Strawberry
much
blonde,
about.
maybe?
Yeah. But they do care enough about it to the point that we got a new edition recently. And so this video is for people who have not previously played the Middle-earth strategy battle game, or maybe haven't played it in a long time, it's been around for ages, who might be interested in checking it out. We know right now there's kind of a lot of hype around it. There's a new edition, like I mentioned, a new starter box. So we thought we might give you the perspective of some people who've been playing for a couple of years now. We obviously love the game, but we want to also give kind of a sober, fair, rational review of the game and talk about what we like and don't like. Anything you want to add to that?
No, that's about right. I mean, yeah, like you said, we've played that and other games, so we have plenty to compare it to. So if you're deciding whether you want to play it or not, maybe this will be helpful to you. We can tell you what's good about it, what's bad about it, how it might compare to other games, and yeah, make a decision. But obviously we like it, so it'll be a little, the conclusion is we like it. It's good, get it. But
we have a whole YouTube channel
about it.
I do think it's worth saying, too, if you're watching this and you're one of our subscribers, thank you. Please feel free to share this with one of your friends who's maybe considering getting into the game. Or otherwise, again, if you're new here, thanks for being here. You should definitely like and subscribe because we do battle reports and we do these Now for Chats episodes where we just chit-chat about the game, which I know people sharing their opinion on the internet is probably a new concept for you, but that's what we do here. We share our opinion.
It's true.
Real quick, Andrew, I thought it'd be fun to talk about how we got into this game. So Andrew and I have been playing miniature games together for quite a long time. We did X-Wing, we did Star Wars Armada, that migrated to Star Wars Legion. I think we got a little bit of Star Wars fatigue. We dabbled in Kill Team for a while and enjoyed that. And then one day, how did we even hear about? Because I was aware the game existed, but I never really... Oh, I know what
Eric,
it was.
Right?
It was Eric, and we were at a tournament for Legion, and they had all the boards.
Oh, yeah.
And we were like, this is pretty cool.
Yeah. I had this unfair thought that just... I knew about it, sort of, or you knew about it, obviously, too. But I had this unfair thought that, I knew it was kind of old. I thought maybe, it's Lord of the Rings, but maybe mechanically,
not that interesting.
Yeah, we maybe too simple or whatever. I think we watched a video on it, and it looked kind of simple. It's deceptively simple, which we'll get to. But
we'll talk about that.
But yeah, someone encouraged us to try it.
Our friend Eric was like, why don't I bring the models down, and I'll show you guys how to play. And I think we were both like, yeah, we're doing that. We're ordering it. We ordered the starter set. And we have not looked back since ordering that starter set.
I mean, speaking for myself, I'm more of a Lord of the Rings person than a Star Wars person.
I am too.
But the Star Wars games were all just newer, so it was like I associated newness with having learned from past games and growing and being the better game.
And in fairness, I think, and maybe where I'm jumping ahead a little bit, Legion has a lot of really cool modern game mechanics, like the way the initiative cards work and the way the dice aren't just numerical, like the dice, you have a lot of play with those. So it does have feels very modern. And this does feel kind of rooted in an older style system, but it really works. We'll talk about what works and what doesn't. So jumping right in, you said, hey, we're both big Lord of the Rings fans, and this game nails Lord of the Rings. Yeah. It really does get the theme just right. There's so many things that work really well. We have a list here that we can talk about, but there's lots of stuff that happens on the tabletop where the rules reflect what you want. And our first bullet point is you can run Denethor, crazy old Denethor.
Old tomato boy.
Old chomping on tomatoes, and he can lose his mind at the start of the turn unless Boromir's around. Yep. So if Boromir's around, he's much more reliable. If Boromir's not around, he can kind of start being crazy at the start of each turn. So that's a cool, it's baked into the rules and it's baked into the balance. He's kind of inexpensive as a result of the fact that you might not be able to do what you want with him. Why don't your turn?
Yeah, and then Éowyn gets to ride with Mary, which is cool. So Éowyn can take Mary on her horse in certain armies where it was thematic. I think probably most of the ones where you take her, she can take Mary.
I think so.
But, yeah, a couple things like that. And similarly, Arwen can, in a certain list, have Frodo with her on the horse. The Road to Rivendell?
Yeah, Road to Rivendell,
where she's riding off with Frodo.
And I did my man Glorfindel dirty, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
fine. He did that in the book. Also, Éowyn and Éomer both will suffer from grief if Theoden dies, or Éomer if Éowyn dies, and so they get more crazy. They do more damage, but they're kind of less reliable.
Yeah, they're forced to charge enemies enemies if they can. Yeah, so stuff like that where people kind of lose control because of certain things happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm just going down the list here. Some of the cool, fun things.
A cool army, Return of the King. You can take Aragorn with a bunch of dead guys, and Legolas and Gimli, the three hunters. Yeah. So bunch of ghosty boys. Just there's a lot of, and this would be something some people might not love about the new edition compared to the old one. There's much more thematic lists that capture specific moments in the movies, in this case, and later the books when the other book comes out. But just like encapsulate perfect moments where it's exactly what you saw.
That's
it's Aragorn and the three hunters and a bunch of ghosts.
Yep, and he's holding gonna hold their oaths fulfilled. One of my favorites that had to make honorable mention is Whirl of Steel. If you remember that opening scene when the orcs are charging the line of elves and they flip their blades up, that's a rule in the game now. If you play the Last Alliance, which is awesome, and it's a good rule too. It's pretty nasty.
Yeah, so if the elves don't move and you charge the elves, then they get a chance to just straight up wound whatever, charge them.
Which I love. Cool. And the image in your head of your battle line, and they're just, and their orcs are dying. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah. And Legolas and Gimli have a rule that interacts with each other where they're keeping count. So if Legolas has more kills than Gimli in a game, then Gimli gets some bonuses to sort of try to catch up. They're competing and getting motivated by not being ahead. It's really cool. Yeah.
Yep. Two more we'll talk about, but there's so many. Like we could do this all day. Yeah. Grima, Wormtongue, you can play him, and he deploys with your opponent's army and makes their heroes weaker. Basically, it makes it harder for them to do the things they want to do because he's just whispering in their ears. And I love it. He's so gross. I love it, man. Yep. Last one.
And the Balrog has a whip, a flame whip. That's probably not the name. Flame of
Whiplash, right? Wasn't it? No, isn't it a lash? Fiery Lash.
Fiery Lash.
That's what it is. Whiplash.
Whiplash.
He got the whiplash.
Yeah. So he can pull an enemy into him with his ranged weapon. Ranged weapons usually, I guess usually, other than the Watcher in the Water, nothing really
you're
yanks
like throwing
toward
things,
you.
But
he whips an enemy model into base contact with him if he succeeds, and then just like he did to poor Gandalf.
That's right. Same with the Watcher in the Water, like Andrew mentioned. He's got tentacles. He can grab things and pull them over. Just love it. Yeah. So talk about the format for the video. We're going to talk now a little bit more about kind of general what we like. Then we will talk about things to know before getting started and kind of like what you'll need to buy or what you'll need to figure out. And then, we'll kind of wrap up with some tips to get started.
Yep.
So let's take it away, man.
Yeah. So
what should you know?
I guess a broad thing about the game that I find very appealing and it makes it kind of easy to get into is it's easy to play. Like, especially if you have one army for yourself and you're playing against one army, once you get familiar, it's not that complicated, but the skill ceiling is also very high, I think. Like, a good player this is sort of a dicey game in a way, but a good player is going to win.
They're going to put themselves in situations to mitigate bad luck and capitalize on good luck.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely the core mechanics you can teach someone in 15 minutes. I mean, I taught my wife. We played a game and she got it. Yep. Like until you start layering in all the extra stuff, which is where a lot of the fun comes in. But the core mechanics are really pretty simple and pretty straightforward. I think all good games are like that. Like, it's easy to pick up. You can be playing in 10 minutes. You can set up two armies and be like, here we go. Here's how this works. And you're like, cool, got it. I see the stat line. I understand all those. Yeah. And people play it every week, every day because it's difficult to master. Yeah. And that to me is the journey is the fun.
It is very possible to make mistakes that you don't see that are, right. Because you're not thinking a turn ahead, because you're not thinking 2 turns ahead, or you forgot about something crazy that your opponent can do. And the amount of matchups, I haven't done the math on it, but it's a gigantic number. Your strategies against one army are not going to work against another.
That's right.
And there are right now 6 scenarios. There will be 18?
There's going to be 18 more. Yeah. So it's going to be 24 total scenarios.
Yeah. So when you think about combinations of opponents, scenarios,
endless.
You have to be using your brain to think about, you're calculating at all times, deciding what the best move is and making sacrifices, taking gambles, calculated risks. There's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Another thing, not just how simple the game is, it feels right mechanically. And in fact, when our friend Eric kind of got us into the game, he was like, you know what? If you just take magic and monsters and all the stuff out, game's just like a good sword and board game. It feels, you could use this rule set to do Vikings fighting Normans or, you know, whatever. Like pretty much any sword and board era in history, this game works for, because cavalry operates the way you expect cavalry to. It's like spear lines and battle lines where you kind of have like your ranks deep with spears, and sometimes pikes where they go like even deeper. That operates like the blocks operate the way you want to, and there is mechanical benefit in a lot of cases to playing your guys in a like block formation where they've got like a tight frontage and they've got shield walls standing next to each other with spears behind them. So the game just feels like it should from a core mechanics. And then on top of that, things like magic, things like shooting, and kind of like the special characters and stuff. Just it works the way you expect it to.
Yeah, it's great. And like, I think real world tactics to a certain degree essentially work. Like, you want to flank with your cavalry, like hit their lines from the side, and then that makes your front line do better because you've thinned out their spear supports and things. It just feels it feels good. There's nothing gamey feeling about the basic sword and boardness. It feels how you think it would.
That's right. And that is where I do draw a big contrast between games like Kill Team, where, not saying the game doesn't reward like real world tactics, but there's so much little gamey interactions. And I say gamey, that's not a negative thing. That is kind of the fun of Kill Team. But there's so many little like things you're like trying to track, and auras and things, that those are what matter. But in this, like, man, if you get the basics right, like, cool, I've got my anvil and my hammer closing the trap. Like, that stuff works the way it does in history. Like, you can, you know, more or less those kind of things translate to the tabletop. What else, Andrew? What we got?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many ways to play the game. Are like, the factions have such distinct identities and such huge differences, and they all work for the most part. I mean, especially now more than ever. I hope that's true anyway. But like, for example, you can have a 60 model army at 800 points or something, or you could have an 8 model army where you're just taking a bunch of really strong heroes or a bunch of eagles or something, like, and they both work. They have their advantages. They have ways to mitigate their weaknesses, like the super low model count armies have something going for them. Obviously, those models are great, but there's risk. You know, the other person gets a lot of dice. It's just a lot of variety. Like,
there's a ton of variety. I do think that can be a pro and a con. Because as you're learning the game, there's so many armies and profiles to memorize that makes it tough. On the other hand, it makes it really cool. You can always be exploring a new list that you're excited about, and the more you play, you'll face something like, oh, that was a really cool army. I want to try that, or I want to try something like that. So a lot of variety, for better or worse. But there's a lot of stuff in the Lord of the Rings that happens. And
you want it all to be represented.
You do, right.
You want the Black Riders as their, that's a very low model count army, but it's in the movies. You want it to be there.
You can have up to 9. And that's it. You can also take them on wraiths, or wraiths on wings, rather. You can have the Nazgul flying around. Those are cool. You can fly by and snatch guys up and do strafing runs. Like, it's just so good. I'll shut up now.
Shut up.
I'm an idiot. Let's talk about this that I was a little bit surprised by. The game is actually quite popular. Not compared to like 40K, but as a result, the game is at a size where the community is kind of tight-knit. Like, everyone kind of knows everyone without it being super huge. And the community is generally pretty welcoming. Now, I will tell you, I'm an old man. I hesitate to say this kind of blanket positive, like, our community is great, because not everybody, right?
Yeah,
that's
not
just
everybody.
It's still human beings. There's still people that you're like, oh my gosh, I hope I don't have to play that dude. But by and large, it's a pretty fun, welcoming community that generally is pretty positive. I think that's true of a lot of gamers, but there are some games that we've played where that is maybe not so much the case. A lot of them it is the case. But I do think kind of every community is like, our gaming community is the best. It's just a very human thing to do. But people here are like really helpful. There's a lot of really cool YouTube channels.
A lot of regional Discords and Facebook groups for the game. So wherever you live, for the most part, probably got a decent community. I think we're extra lucky living in like Eastern, Central.
We've got
whatever.
We specifically do have a great community, I think. And our group of friends that play this, like, definitely makes this, for me, a lot more enjoyable.
Yep.
It's pretty cool. I mean, we chat every single day about this game. And whether it's a few thoughts or like deep, there are sometimes I look at my phone, I'm like, oh my God.
6 billion notifications.
100 missed messages. Yeah. But that's great because you get to, kind of be a part of something. Going back to the list variety, what do you think there?
What do I think there? So the balance is difficult in a game where there are 4 billion factions, especially such distinct.
Yeah,
you're not just balancing a bunch of troops against each other. Right. They give slight benefits. There are some special rules that are just wacky, and they're gonna make things really hard for you. But overall, despite some lists feeling like they're better in a better spot, the game is winnable with almost everything.
I would agree with that.
There's a bit of paper, rock, scissors. If you pick something and it's the absolute worst matchup for it, then you're going to have a bad time. So at a tournament, you want to take something kind of well-rounded, or just accept
or you
that
lean into
lean into it and just hope you have a really good luck in opponents. But in general, most things can win. I think you'll see a lot of people talk about some so-and-so's overpowered, so-and-so's underpowered, but those differences aren't huge especially as you get to higher points. Like,
I would agree with that. And I also think, like, if you are playing a miniature game that's balanced by points, that's going to be a problem. Or it's going to be something to mitigate. Like, there's always going to be whack-a-mole. Because points don't accurately represent every single possible variable and permutation of matchup, it's just an approximation.
Yeah.
So you have to go into this game, and I think every miniature game, with the mindset that not everything's going to be perfectly balanced. And yet, I do think what Andrew's saying is, for the most part, I think almost any list can do really well. If piloted well, if practiced well, and with a little luck in matchups. Because because there's such a huge spectrum of armies, there are sometimes like, oh my gosh, I'm playing this army against that army. I have no chance.
Yep.
See also our battle report today of Eagles versus Orcs. That did not work so well.
Not really.
But, the points in general are pretty good, and they do twice a year FAQ updates, which help balance the game some. They don't do deep balancing the way Legion does, but by and large, that will kind of keep things more or less even.
Yep.
So it's pretty close. As far as games go, this game is living. There's frequent FAQs, and they try to keep it pretty well balanced. And it's as good as any game out there in balance.
Yep. Agreed. What's next?
Dueling. Just the way duels work. The way fights work.
Yeah. You're not just rolling damage on each other to see who kills stuff.
Right.
You duel first. So basically, it's contested dice. If I've got one model, you've got one model, we each roll a d6, and other than some exceptions.
Yeah, and by the way, we're not going to get deep into the mechanics. Yeah. There are other YouTube channels you should Google if you're interested in the mechanics, but what Andrew's still talking about is just like the theme.
Yeah.
And it is truly like, my model is performing against yours. It's not like 40K where you're like, okay, cool, I've got 19 las guns, and so I'm rolling this, 40 pile of dice and everything kind of evens out. It's like, this is my individual dude, and he's rolling right now.
And a lot of times that individual dude is a hero against a big bad hero. And, you can get lucky, or the other person can get pretty unlucky. And some cool moments can happen where, a guy stands strong for 3 turns in a row, stopping up the biggest hero.
He's holding up his shield against the Balrog, and he's just like, oh my gosh. And I will say that to me, that dice variability is the biggest double-edged sword of the game.
Yep.
If you're on a cool streak with your dice, it feels pretty bad. But when you have those moments like Andrew's describing, where one dude is like, I'm going to shut this down.
Yeah.
It feels cool. Yeah. And it feels Lord of the Rings. Like it's one model doing something epic. It's awesome. I love that.
Yep. So I'm trying to remember Legion, but or other games in general. I know in a lot of games it's common for the phases
to activate. Right? It's units.
Yeah. Someone does their whole turn. So and so does their whole turn. And in Lord of the Rings, there's a move phase. I move, then you move. There's a shooting phase. I shoot, then you shoot, and so on. It's broken up nicely, which I think feels pretty good. There's priority isn't
it works for this game. Yeah. Other games like Bolt Action, like Legion, where it's like unit by unit, feels a little more atomic, and you're never waiting on your opponent.
Yeah.
But because the model count in this game doesn't get too huge, you're never really like sitting around twiddling your thumbs. Like I've played some games like, okay, it's your move. I guess I'll see you in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
This is generally pretty quick because your models, a horde army is like 60, 80 models max in a big game. And typically you're somewhere more like 40 models on 40 models. And because they're kind of moving in blocks, typically it's like the game flows pretty quickly. The back and forth phases work the way they've done it. It's not like I take my entire turn and then you take your entire turn.
Right.
It does work pretty well.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, and speaking of, you mentioned points levels. I see a lot of people ask what the standard points level is. There is no standard points level for this game. Some people are a little bit surprised by that, but I think it's great because
I think so
we'll
too.
go to a tournament that's 400 points, and certain things work at 400 points that don't work at 800 points. So it's nice to get to play in certain things sweet spot, or what you feel is their sweet spot. Yeah, I think I would not be like deterred by that fact at all. Like, it's really cool. Like, build your army. You know, most games are going to fall between 500 and 800 points.
Probably bigger games tend to be that.
Yeah. So when you're building, if you're trying to build up a force, shoot for 800 at the most. But you can have a lot of fun at 600. We were just talking. I think 600 is kind of maybe the sweet spot in the new edition right now. It
might be my favorite right now.
So,
but there are tournaments, like specialist tournaments, that are like, this is a 200-point tournament.
And it works too.
They work. Fun, the game works at all levels. I mean, when we first started playing, we played several like 150, 200-point games to kind of learn the basics. And I had just as much fun with those as big 800-point. In fact, there reaches a point where I'm kind of like, this is too big. Like, there's too much stuff going on.
Yeah.
I personally like that 600, 700 range. That's when you kind of get all the toys, but it's not like too much stuff on the table. But yeah, to Andrew's point, the game really works at all levels. There is not a standard points level.
Yep.
And you'll see tournaments run the gamut, which is really cool.
Yep.
Last thing, talking about units. There is no cohesion in this game, like 40K or Legion. You don't have to keep guys around. You can send one individual guy off on a mission all on his own. Only in deployment do things kind of have to be within range of their leader. It's by warbands. Again, we're not going to get super into the mechanics, but once you're on the table, everybody can be an individual. Every model can go do their own thing.
Yeah, which is fun, and I think it plays into the good sword and board kind of rules, and it just works out. That you can fill gaps with guys and do whatever makes sense. Send them off for objectives. You don't have to worry about.
That's right.
These guys don't have to stay together. I think it's nice.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, we've talked a lot about what we love about the game. We've touched on some of the things that are less than ideal. Let's talk about some of the things you should go into with open eyes. If you're getting into this game, what should you be aware of?
Yeah, if you're getting into miniatures games for the first time in general, you should know it can get pricey.
Yeah, it's a luxury hobby.
Yeah, it is a luxury hobby. But if you're watching this video, you probably know the starter set or whatever costs a chunk of change. But there are reasonable ways to get into it that aren't too bad.
Right.
But
it's also addicting. So you'll be like, well, I do want to buy these other guys. Yeah. Then maybe paint them up. I mean, my pile of shame is disgusting. I have so many unpainted models, and I'm still thinking about buying more stuff. So if you're new to miniature games, you have a lot of education, but chances are you're here understanding that it is pricey. The game's pricey, and they're Games Workshop models.
Yep.
So if you're buying all official models, they're pretty expensive.
Yep. You play a game with an army, and you're like, I really wish I had so and so and so and so in this, and then you got to buy a few more models.
That's right.
But take it slow, enjoy it. I don't think it's not too bad.
No.
We got into it very gradually, and that's a fun thing to do. Like every 3 months or whatever, maybe you get a new. Maybe not a new army, but a couple something different to run. You can keep it fresh for yourself in that way by building out the finances gradually.
That's right.
Depleting your bank account gradually.
Yeah, that's right.
We also talked about this, but it is dicey, which we said is a good and a bad thing.
Right.
But I think we would consider it a con worth considering. There can be some moments that feel really bad when you're
big hero.
Yeah, watch our channel, any video where I have a big hero, and you'll see, Aragorn's against whatever. One orc needs to kill it so that he can go off and kill something else, and then just rolls, a bunch of twos, and there's nothing to do. So, whereas a game like Legion or something like that, you're rolling generally a lot more dice. Right. So it's very...
They veer more towards an average.
More.
Yeah. I mean, you still have, but it's still a bell curve. With a single die, there is no bell curve. It's an even distribution. And then with more dice, it veers towards, but typically dice pools in this game never get that huge.
Right.
I mean, if you have a bunch of guys fighting one thing, sure.
Yeah.
But like one hero, typically no more than 4 dice.
Right, yeah. So in general, a big standard hero is 3 attacks, 4 on a charge. So you're rolling 3 or 4 dice, and, you know, if the other person rolls a 6 and you roll a 3 at most, they win the duel because you can't spend you have resources to spend. You kind of can't beat them. So those things do happen. It can feel good when you're on the good side of it, and can feel bad when you're on the bad side of it. But, you know, it goes back to like kind of calculating risks, knowing that things could go wrong. So set yourself up for, you know, the best odds.
Right.
And
that's it.
Hope it goes
Put
away.
yourself in the best position and be ready to mitigate if it doesn't work.
Yep.
Yeah. It can be frustrating.
Yep.
It can also be awesome.
Yep.
You know?
And I think it's just games in general. You know, it's like you said, it's a double-edged sword. You know, there are bad things about everything being very predictable because you're rolling 16 dice. Like, okay, or we're playing chess at this point. Not really.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That can be good and bad in its own ways.
Yep.
So yeah, like we said, it's really a double-edged sword.
Yep.
Let's see what else. A lot of profiles. This model range is huge because it does cover everything in the movies and a lot of stuff that's in the books, including stuff in the Second Age. Like, there's just a lot of characters, each typically with 1 or 2 special rules, and the way those all interact, it can be tough. We've been playing for years now, and there's still some models that I'll be like, okay, sorry. Yeah. What does this guy do again? Right. I haven't faced it enough. We don't own it. Like, it's 2 full books worth of profiles that are kind of challenging to track everything. So that can be a major drawback when someone brings something that you're completely unfamiliar with, and on the fly you have to figure out how you're going to face it. That also could be part of the fun. Right. But it can be tough. I like to know everything. I want to be like, you know, a lore master of Gondor down in the shadows with my candles pouring over things, and still something will come up and I'm like, I have no recollection of this place.
Yep. And, you know, you can mitigate it by, one, just asking your opponent to explain it to you. Like, say you're at a tournament and you're getting into the game. I've many, many times asked, you know, can you run down what your list does in general for me? And not a single person has been upset about that.
No.
And you can just have the tools handy to keep track of things, and it's not too bad. And if you're playing in a small group or with a friend who's also new, you just, you know, try and find out ahead of time what each of you is taking. Right. Get familiar with it. Because it's hard, you know, it's one thing to learn the rules of someone's list right before you start playing. It's another to be able to actually like digest and think about what that's going to do before, you know, if you're learning as you're putting models on the table, it's a little too late at that point. But just, you know, don't worry about it. It's not too bad. Yeah, it's not bad. And you'll see a lot of like patterns, a lot of things kind of repeat. Like, oh, that guy's kind of like that other guy. Yeah. And yet everyone kind of has their own unique flavor. But that is one of the challenging parts of the game. There's just so much stuff. And not just the models. The armies now, especially in the new edition, they have, you know, I still think maybe not as bad as like Kill Team, but like multi-paragraph kind of special rules. But they could be summed up in much
But it's not as bad as Kill Team, where everyone has their own like ploys and all that stuff, and it moves quick too. You're like getting a new army all the time. So this one's not as bad. Yep. But it's worse than like a Legion. Yeah. Where you're like, there's a hand. I mean, there's probably 10 times the number of profiles in this game as there are in Legion. Yep. Maybe not that bad, but certainly like 5 times. Yeah.
What else we got here?
Complexity.
Yeah, another double-edged sword, I guess. It's a little more complicated than it seems. There's some still like sort of debated or poorly understood little interactions that people just, you know, questions that get asked a lot that we generally know the answers by this point, but we're also pretty tuned in. You can get surprised by some things that you didn't. I'm having trouble thinking of any examples, but the game the rulebook is, you know, it's thick. There's a lot of interactions. There's a lot of edge cases that you may not come up against after even 30 games. And then you do. And I think
that's true of most miniature games. Yep. I mean, you know, a rule book that has to cover things like an eagle swooping down and a guy casting a spell. Yeah. It's tough to cover every single thing and how everything interacts. It's not horrible, but it will come up. Like, as you're playing this, you'll be like, I don't know how to handle this situation. Or it'll be some edge case in the rulebook that you just don't remember for a situation that comes up. And, Andrew mentioned, like, when we first started watching videos, like, this game is, like, pretty simple. Mm-hmm. And then we actually started playing, like, it's actually not very simple.
Not very simple.
It's simple to learn. Yep. But for the most part, the complexity is where a lot of the fun lies. And like 1% of the time or less than that, the complexity is like, I don't know how these things interact.
Yeah.
I don't understand
Yeah.
how to resolve this situation. You kind of just have to figure it out on the fly or try to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, at tournaments, we've definitely, or I know I've called the TO over, sometimes because I knew something and my opponent didn't agree, so you bring the TO over to tell us how it actually is supposed to work, but that's okay. You mitigate it, you have your rules book on you, and you guys figure it out. But there are going to be those moments. But
yeah, it's not frequent. It's not like you're constantly poring over the rules. No. I mean, 9 out of 10 games are like pretty straightforward. But you do get that 1 out of 10 like, hey, I don't know how this works. Last thing, let's just talk about one more thing to know. Because there are so many factions, and we touched on this a little bit, there are some matchups that can be a little demoralizing, where you're just like, I don't have a good answer. Not just matchup, but matchup and scenario combination. Particularly with skew lists, where you're like, I took a skew list, and I just so happen to be amazing at what you're running. Yeah. Because it can be a little paper, rock, scissors, that can suck. Yep. Where you just kind of feel like, I'm hitting a brick wall. I got no answer to this. Yep. It does happen. Yep. It's not frequent. No. But it does come up.
And if you're thinking about that going into a tournament, you, like we said, run something well-rounded, or you run a skew list knowing you're... Yep. And then, But it's not so bad. I mean, in tournaments in the past, there are some bad matchups, especially like if the combination of scenario is really bad. But,
I've had some really bad matchups, but they still weren't awful games. Yeah. Like I've only had a handful of games where I walked away from I had absolutely no chance there. It has happened, but by and large, it's not the case. And I tend to play a well-rounded list. Yeah. I don't go to tournaments with a skew. So I think about all the things that I might face as skew and the middle of the road. I'm like, okay, how am I going to deal with terror in an army? That's a big thing where your troops might be scared. And if you've leaned into like orcs aren't very brave. And if it's like, well, I took a horde of orcs and I'm facing an army that all has terror, how are you going to mitigate that? Yep. Are you going to mitigate that? Or are you just going to hope that you don't face it? So there are things like that, which that's also part of the fun.
I mean, every army has its weaknesses, but it has strengths to make up for them. Right. So if you run into something where your weakness really, really matters, then oops. But But like you said a second ago, a lot of times it's not as bad as you think when both before it starts, but also as the game's going, there have been a lot of times where like, well, this is over, this is going horribly, and then it just turns around and like...
It happens.
How
many times have we had... I have to learn that lesson all the time. Yeah. I'll be in a situation where I can't win from this. And then one interaction where you flip it and you're like, oh, I just killed his big monster that I wasn't expecting to kill. Okay, all of a sudden, this is looking up, and then you win. Yeah. Which is also my least favorite thing to do as an opponent, when I'm like, you got this, and then I win. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. But it happens. Yeah. And that is because of the low diciness, I think. Like, things will... or the high diciness, low numbers of dice, a situation will just come up. You're like, whoa, I just like totally turned this around.
You can let it slip if you think you're winning. Be careful.
It's true.
Because you could still lose.
Yeah. All right, let's move into our last section here, which is, maybe you've heard this. I hope we haven't turned you off with some of those negative things. We more just want people to be aware of the game. Again, we are here because we think this game is awesome. It's my favorite miniature game out there, and I've played a lot over the years. And we hope that you are interested in trying it out. So let's talk about like where to get started. So you want to play the game. You're like, cool, that sounds good. What do I do next? Yeah. What's my next step?
So the newest thing, I guess, would be the starter box, which is the War of the Rohirrim starter box, which has a Rohan-ish army and a bad boys.
Bad boys. They're the wild men of Dunland. Yeah. Listen, I'm going to be honest. The starter boxes are a good deal. They are a good deal. It comes with a rule book. It comes with 2 armies. Unless you're really interested in Rohan or Dunland, I would skip the starter box. Yep. Because it's Rohan on foot, which is not generally a great army. Dunland is maybe kind of cool. It's kind of remains to be seen. I think this starter box is the least exciting that they've done so far.
It's also based on the new movie, which,
I think it had to be. The new movie came out, and they're like, cool, we're going to like tie this relaunch. I'm sure there was some licensing there. Yeah. So it does make sense. Yeah. But I think from a practical standpoint, unless you're like, both of those armies seem really fun to learn the game, which I think is true. I think the starter box is well balanced and pretty cool against each other. Yeah. But I think in the broader game, those might not be the armies for you. If they are, starter box is a great deal.
Yeah. There are some, what were they called? The
battle hosts.
Battle hosts. So there were some battle hosts that hopefully are not sold out. I know you can probably find them. There's a Minas Tirith battle host, which is pretty cool. So Minas Tirith, Gondor, essentially interchangeable in this case.
Yeah, that one works for a lot of different armies.
Yeah, so it's an interesting
Gandalf
one,
the White
now,
in it, right?
And it's an interesting one now because it has Gandalf the White, and I think the only place where Gandalf the White and Minas Tirith go together is atop the wall.
That's a good point. Yeah,
because a lot of the Minas Tirith stuff. So in the last edition, Minas Tirith was a much broader army where you could take Boromir, you could take Gandalf the White, Faramir. Now, the actual Minas Tirith army is more like Denethor, Faramir, Boromir. But
just atop the wall and Defenders of the Pelennor, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, is he on Pelennor? Gandalf White's not on Pelennor,
so,
is he? Okay, yeah. So maybe the Minas Tirith battle host. It's still a good deal, and Gandalf the White. It's all plastic, so the prices are pretty low for these models. The battle hosts have a nice little discount. That's still a good starter.
Yeah. Just know that you'll want to grab some different Minas Tirith heroes probably, and
almost
fill
definitely.
it out. But no matter what you buy, you'll probably. Unless you buy the actual starter set and just want to get started for as cheap as possible, which, despite all the stuff we said before, it's still probably because you get the rule book.
Yeah, it's a good deal.
You get some terrain, you get some mats you can play on. So if you have nothing, it's probably a good deal. If you just want to learn the game and get started and know that, you're going to expand in different directions, it's not bad. But
Agreed. The Isengard battle host still holds up pretty well.
Yeah.
It's comes with Saruman and Grima and a bunch of Uruk. Are they Uruk warriors in it or Uruk scouts? I forget.
I don't remember.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's a good set if you're interested in Isengard, and I think Isengard's actually really good in this edition.
Yeah.
So that'd be a fun place to start.
And also keep in mind, as you look into what's available in some of the actual armies as you go to build them, if an army calls for, Uruk scouts and you only have Uruk warriors, just run your Uruk warriors as Uruk scouts if you want to learn the game. Like if you're just trying to have fun and try out stuff, just don't worry about it. Like as long as you're not trying to mix them with all the same model.
Yeah.
Just bend what each profile is a little bit if you want to. Especially since some of these were made for the last edition, it's going to be a little harder to build stuff out to be a complete army.
I suspect we'll see newer battle hosts in the future because these are they've gotten a little wonky now. There's also the Mordor one, which is the Witch King on horse, a bunch of orcs. I forget, warg riders.
Yeah, maybe one of those.
So that would still work as well.
I think it works for Minas Morgul. I think I did the math on that. I think that's the only one it works on, which is a good army.
Yeah,
Minas Morgul, or we think anyway.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Otherwise, though, there's really kind of 3 books to get right now, which is a lot. It's a bit of an investment. There is the rule book, which I think is essential. Don't skimp on the rule book.
Let's get the rule book.
When people, let's get the rule book. And then there's the Army of Lord of the Rings, or Armies of Lord of the Rings, which is basically all the lists from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and then the Armies of the Hobbit, which is all the armies from the Hobbit trilogy. So you could pick one of those if you like one over the other. We have both just because we want to be able to read and research what we're going to be facing. And then coming at an undetermined time, probably 6 months or so of recording of this video, is the Armies of Middle-earth, which are going to be different takes on it from the book. It's going to introduce a lot more profiles, a lot of older stuff is going to be coming back at that time, have some new armies, modify some existing armies. We don't know a whole lot more about it than that, but so that'll be kind of a third army book. That's how many profiles there are on the game. It takes 3 big old books to get all the profiles.
In addition to that, as kind of a holdover, there's the Rise of Angmar book. So we do have things like Glorfindel and a couple of Angmar things. And that's a free PDF. So you can just start there and not buy.
There you go.
Any of them.
That's right.
But
okay, let's wrap this up. We've rambled a lot here, but if you're going to get started, again, like we've already said, play low points. Your opponents, you'll probably find people who are down with that. I mean, if someone right now are like, hey, I'm just learning, can we play 300 points? But absolutely, 300 points is super fun.
Yeah.
I would say work towards pretty balanced armies when you're first learning the game. Don't go for crazy skew stuff. Hey, I've never played a game, I'm bringing eagles. Just don't do that.
Don't bring all hero armies, just, standard, a hero, some troops kind of things. Yeah.
Start with the basics to learn the basics, and then expand from there.
And if there's an army that, as you browse through all the armies that exist in the game, if there's one that you think sounds awesome, it's your favorite thing from the movies or whatever, but you're not sure how to get started, like we said, there's communities everywhere. Just ask people, if I want to start with so-and-so, what's an example? Rivendell, what should I get for a 500 point army, or what's a good points level for them, or just ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions, or ask questions to us in the comments.
Yeah,
we'll help you out.
We'll help you. It's fun.
I know there are the starter sets that seem like, and they are a good deal generally, but if those don't appeal to you, they're not what gets you excited, then just piece together an army. Like, you buy all the stuff. That's how you generally would do it. So.
Yep, that's it. It's easy. Otherwise, just some basic stuff. There are some ways to get going where you introduce new things little by little. Like, you could start with no heroes. You could start with heroes, but don't use heroic actions. You'll learn what all those things are. You can say like no monsters and then introduce a monster in your later game. Yeah. Just, I would say, build. Don't try to boil the ocean all at the beginning. Yeah. Just kind of, start small and iterate, trying to kind of figure the game out.
Yeah,
that made it really fun for us.
Yeah. Yeah, there are certain parts of the game that add a significant amount of complexity. Certain models in the game that add a significant amount of complexity. That there are plenty of armies that don't have any of those things. So the simplest version of the game would be a humanoid hero and just some dudes with them.
Do Minas Tirith versus orcs. Yeah, there you go.
You'll have some special rules in there. It's not like completely vanilla, but none of the like flying, monsters, spells.
Yep.
Those add a lot of complexity. So if you want to ease yourself into it without getting too overwhelmed by rules, I think. Yeah.
All right, let's wrap this up. One last thought. If you want to play around with army building, I would be remiss not to mention Andrew's excellent app, Tabletop Admiral, which you can find at modular.tabletop.admiral.com. Sound off in the comments, check Reddit to figure out how to get started with that. It's an awesome way to just play around with lists. You can use it on your phone, use it on your desktop. You could probably use it on like a smart refrigerator, smart microwave.
I always wheel my refrigerator into tournaments.
Hey, keep your drinks.
It does have, shout out to the game mode, which I think is helpful for new players who want to be able to easily look up other people's stuff. You can just like add in whatever your opponent has, and then you can just open it up anytime and look at their rules.
It's pretty cool.
To refresh your memory instead of asking your opponent 100 times. You should still ask your opponent the first time because it's easier to digest when someone explains it to you. But
it's a great app, great place to get started. Otherwise, please sound off in the comments if there's anything we can do to help you, any questions you might have. And we sure hope you join us because this game is fantastic.
It's true.
Any closing thoughts?
And if you are a veteran of the game and have any other thoughts that you want to add for anybody to see, comment if you, for some reason, watch this whole video, even though you play the game. But, help people out in the comments and everywhere else.
Cool. Well, hopefully we'll see you out there.